Mr. Rohit Vyas, welcome to ITV Gold. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you for having me back on once again.
Of course, a lot is happening in politics, so let's go right into it. My first question to you deals with the state of Florida. The governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, has said that masks are a parental decision, not a government decision. The White House to him has said to get out of the way and let local officials and administrators do their job while schools go back into opening up. So my first question to you is, how are you looking at this? The White House is saying this already to them to get out of the way. Why is the governor not changing his decision?
I think he's looking to run eventually, maybe 2024 for president. And he thinks this whole idea of people having a free choice to do whatever they want is going to work in his favor, similar as it had done in the case of Donald Trump. And I think he's trying to carry on that same narrative of thinking. However, he is putting, in everybody's opinion, and in every health expert's opinion, he is putting health care of people of his own population at high risk. Case in point, the cruise lines, Norwegian Cruise Lines and others, they have brought in an injunction by a federal judge to prevent his no mask mandate, because he also refused to allow the cruise lines to insist on full vaccination proof, to insist on masking, things like that, when they board at Florida ports, if passengers board at Florida ports. And the cruise line has challenged that pretty effectively so far. The question here now is the safety of everyone. The question is the safety of employees in establishments that deal with the public. It's also the safety of people who are visiting those establishments, being everywhere. And with the ever virulent Delta surge that's going on worldwide right now, I think a lot of individuals are extremely cautious and are incredulous, can't believe that the governor of Florida would still insist on a ban on a mask mandate. Nobody's saying there should be a mandate, but there have to be rules and regulations to some degree, and that should be left up to individual entities, including schools, including local government, municipalities, etc., to decide if they have a high prevalence of infection in their particular areas, then they should be able to enforce masks.
You know, quite interestingly enough, Florida, along with a bunch of other states that are showing very low rates of vaccination, surging in case numbers, are mainly Republican-led states. They are debating still about schools every single day, you know, even though most of the children are not eligible. What is the point of all of this, and how dangerous do you think this could get politically and for the children of these states?
First, for the children, it's extremely dangerous. I mean, you can't anymore have schools shut. So the thing to do is to reopen them safely. And the safest thing we have right now, besides vaccination, is masking up, at least masking up to some degree, so that you don't spread the virus, this particular virus, from person to person as swiftly as it has been going around. Many people are not vaccinated, as we've both discussed, and everybody knows that most of the US population is still not vaccinated. About 49% is, or 48% is, but the rest are moving about freely and claiming nothing's going to happen to them. Yet we are seeing hospitals are now once again hard-pressed, actually hard-pressed much more than when this pandemic began. You're having doctors and nurses once again crying out, appealing to people, please don't do this to us. We can't handle the overload. It's a political game. It seems like a political game. It seems like it's a game of popularity. Who will be more popular by going with what people who are, less educated by this say. And the fact is, we have to follow the science. This is a pandemic. This is a dangerous virus. And you can't challenge science on something like this, in my opinion. You just can't. You have to go with the science. You have to go with the experts. And that's what actually every good administrator would do, go with the experts. An administrator, his ability or her ability to administer depends on who the people are that are with them. And you always have experts in every field, in this case in medicine, who will advise you on what you should do. And I think every good leader, good administrator, should follow the advice of competent individuals.
Let me ask you a question here. Do you think President Biden should himself interfere in this? Can his administration do something to perhaps mandate masks in schools? How would that look on a federal level?
Very difficult to do it. You can't unless you declare a national emergency. So if the sort of during the early days of the Trump administration, there was a medical emergency, a pandemic was declared. I don't think it's going to be effective anymore now, and I don't think it'll be effective anymore anywhere in the world for that matter, not just the United States, because people have gotten fed up and they don't want to be told repeatedly what to do. Some authoritarian, nations which are under authoritarian rule, yes, they have no choice. They've been used to being told what to do, but certainly not democracies like the U.S. or some of the other democracies of the world. People do get tired of being told what to do. Dr. Anthony Fauci mentioned that, as a matter of fact, in an interview either yesterday or today, where he said, I know people don't like to be told what to do and they're fed up of that. And he said, I understand that, but the fact is, when you have something as dangerous as this, you've got to start to take what's happening seriously and decide, whether you want to live or die, and whether you want your fellow citizen to live or die. So this is a collective responsibility for every one of us to be responsible, to mask up, to not get into the politics of it. This has nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. This is a national, international health emergency.
Yeah, just for our viewers that are watching you right now, I'd like to say the fact that children cases in the country are actually rising right now, and they are going back to school, and yet we are debating on why masks should be worn in the schools for children that are not eligible to get vaccinated yet.
Yeah, I think it should be left to each of these school districts, as a matter of fact, in the entire country. I don't think anybody should go out there and tell them, but the school district should be able to decide, because it's also the safety of teachers, of the educators themselves. And so if they're afraid to come out there and teach kids need them, we better listen to the schools and let the schools decide individually. I think that would be a better idea, a better approach.
Yeah, and the schools will look up for their interests and will make sure that everybody there is safe and sound. We'll continue to see how the situation folds. Another big issue that I'd like to discuss right now is the big news for the day. Governor Andrew Cuomo has resigned as the New York State's governor, and his resignation will go into effect in 14 days. The lieutenant governor will be taking over the position. How are you looking at all of this? Of course, this comes from, the investigation that went into the sexual harassment cases against the governor that were proven true by the Attorney General. How do we look at this whole issue of Me Too movement, of what he's doing right now? And do you think his resignation is enough?
His resignation is a good start. It took a while. He should have resigned immediately once the Attorney General of the state had come out with the findings. I think anybody who has any kind of self-respect should have done so. It was ironic that President Biden had to call him out right after that news conference to say he should step down. And President Biden, in my opinion, probably did that to save the Democratic Party and say, look, we're going to set the example here. If we're going to go and tell the Republicans, you better call out your leader if he's doing things that they perceive to be crazy, then we better set the example here. Here we have an investigator who is from the state, the Attorney General, who has come out with the investigation, talked about what's happening, gave the proof of whatever was there. The proof of the pudding was right there. And there was no reason for the governor to carry on. He should have resigned. And President Biden had to call him out on that. I think it was a very good thing that happened today, except that he skirted the issue. He had initially, the claim was he would address the media. There'd be a news conference. There was, of course, no news conference. He gave a speech that was read off a teleprompter. And he tried to justify his actions, even though he tried to apologize, but sort of skimmed over it to make it look like he didn't really need to apologize. And indeed, he tried to defend himself. But there's no defending yourself in a situation like this. Now, whether it stops with his resignation or not, if there are if there's any criminal proof of any criminal wrongdoing, I think he should face full prosecution in that case.
Our heart goes out to all the victims, the 11 women that have come forward. I hope you find justice in the way that you deserve. Let's now talk about another big issue that's impacting the world, actually, the climate crisis. The United Nations has come out and said that deadly and irreversible effects of climate change are already here. How are you looking at the issue of climate change when you're seeing wildfires all across the country here and other things happening all across the world? And what do you think the Biden administration needs to do right now for this particular issue?
This is a wake-up call for the entire world. The Intergovernmental Panel, which is the United Nations on the climate crisis, which is a UN body, and the premier body, which has experts from around the world come together and deliver this report, has called it the way it is. We are in trouble. This planet is in trouble. There's no more sitting back and trying to say, "Oh, this is fraudulent, and this is all exaggerated, and it's not true, it's not real." That doesn't apply anymore. We can see it right before our eyes. You mentioned the wildfires. There are mudslides in other parts of the country. Around the world, there have been unprecedented levels of flooding. China, Europe, you've seen torrential waters going through towns and cities, which has never been heard of since the history of this planet. So this is very, very real and very, very serious. It's going to call for a concerted effort by all nations, and we're going to have to go back to the United Nations, in my opinion. As someone who has covered the UN for more than 40 years, I can tell you this is exactly the time the United Nations will have to play the lead role and the crucial role with the support of every nation. All the members of the Security Council, the permanent members, the non-permanent members, and the entire membership of the General Assembly will have to come together, lead the world together. All right. This is not a question of one country versus another anymore. This is a question of the survival of every one of us as a human race, and nations to survive going forward. It's a really serious matter, and that's where President Biden's infrastructure bid, which we today passed the Senate, but is going to go now to the House, has a lot to do with climate change and what he wants to do to ameliorate the crisis, and how he wants to electrify and bring clean energy and things like that. Now, this will have to be followed by nations around the world, but I think it'll all have to be done in concert through a global body like the United Nations.
Right. Just following up to that, what countries do you think could play an important role in this situation?
All
for
of
the
them.
United Nations?
The United States, China, Russia, India, Great Britain, France, all these countries which have been using a lot of fossil fuel, and all of them. Australia, New Zealand. I can think of many, many other countries, and many in Asia which are still developing and therefore consume a lot of fossil fuel, but that's just going to pollute our atmosphere even further. And so we're going to have to come up with alternate energy sources, and they are there.
Right.
Again, the science is there. Now we got to let science dictate and tell us, not dictate, but tell us and lead us, say, okay, this is what we can do to counter this. It's already a dangerous situation and irreversible, as the UN body has said, but maybe we can prolong our existence on the planet at least by a few hundred years, hopefully, if we all work together.
Yes. The climate crisis is a real crisis. Everybody has been shouting and screaming that since the last couple of years. You just mentioned the infrastructure bill. I'd just like a little opinion on what is happening in the Senate. If you could describe to us what the process was like. This is a $1.2 trillion infrastructure package. Does this mean bipartisanship could happen in the U.S. Senate?
It could, but it won't. This took months to pass the way it did, with the support of Republicans as well. And it's not quite the package that President Biden dreamed of, and therefore they're going to attach an addendum and going to have another bill, a companion bill, if you will, in the House. Here's what the problem has been. It seems like some of this bill, not in its original form as proposed by the Biden administration, is compromising with the Republicans to say, all right, we'll turn over a lot of our highway infrastructure, railroad networks, etc., to private industry. All right. Now, the tollways, the toll roadways, the major highways, etc., throughout the country will be handed over to private industry. Now, does that mean private industry can then, well, they'll maintain it, obviously, but then can they just hike tolls, everywhere as they please? And is there a safeguard to prevent them from just abusing that authority that they would then have? I think there's a lot of these type of little things that have been debated over and over again. I think the House particularly is concerned about things like this. So they're going to try and introduce what they call safeguards, social safeguards, a social security net, if you will, a type of social security net, not the social security we know of, but social security meaning so that people, the average working middle class American, will not end up paying tons and tons of money, and therefore whatever they earn is gone, you know. And I think that's one of the big issues over here. The good thing about this bill, yes, infrastructure is suffering, it's creaking with age here in the United States. It's long, long overdue. We need new highways, we need new bridges. We need to upkeep all of these bridges and roadways. Any of us can travel anywhere in this country, and you can see the condition of our roadways. It's a shame, and it should not have been taken so long for something like this to pass.
Yeah.
This bill is 1.2 trillion.
Right.
The House version is going to need about 3.3 trillion or something of that sort. All right, and I don't think, you know, if they're going to pass this now to the House, whether the House passes it, I'm not so sure. They're not going to want to pass it, not even Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She's indicated as such, because the progressives within the Democratic Party itself are not going to take it. They said no. And that's the, you know, Bernie Sanders followers and things like that. They're not going to just give in at this point. Because for them, too, they have the majority now. They don't know if they're going to have that majority for very long. And so it's a do or die situation for them. And I think that's what we're going to see play out.
Yeah, and let's hope the working class families don't have to pay for this, or the lower income families, because that's
exactly it. Yep, and that's the fear. That's what the progressives fear.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Well, my last question to you actually deals with Afghanistan. Again, we have spoken about it a couple of times. U.S. troops have been pulled out of there. I think majority are gone or will be gone by the end of this month. We are hearing news of increased violence in Afghanistan. The Taliban has taken over a couple of provincial capitals. Cities are falling to the Taliban. The Indian consulate had to shut down its last consulate in Afghanistan and evacuated citizens back to India. How is the situation developing there? How dangerous can it get for the countries around it? And what does the United States need to do?
It's extremely dangerous. I don't think the U.S. now is going to be doing anything further other than lending some sort of support, but from afar, to the Afghan forces over there. The idea was that the Afghan forces would take over their own security of the nation, etc., but it's obviously not happening. This is really appalling what's happening in Afghanistan. Children being killed. I hear numbers like hundreds of children being killed. Their families being tortured and killed before them. Children being traumatized. Children themselves being killed. I mean, how can we have, you know, a new generation, an absolutely new generation grow up like this or not even see the light of life? Literally, they're born, they're there, and then they're gone before they even had a chance to exist on Earth or in their homeland. It's a terrible situation. I'm afraid the Taliban will be dishonorable. They will not want to have anything to do with the rest of the world. I think the whole world is going to isolate them because nobody's going to want to deal with a regime that is ruthless, that is going to go back into prehistoric times, you know, and start all these strict laws against women. You won't see women on the streets, things like that. Under the previous Taliban rule, that's what happened. You never saw women on the streets of Afghanistan. And if you did, they had to be in full veil. And if that veil somehow slipped or something, they were stoned. They were stoned to death. That's the kind of thing we'd seen over the years with this type of, leadership from the Taliban. So, you know, I think it's horrifying days ahead for Afghanistan. I think the world again has to come together here to figure out what to do. Maybe open up certain borders in some countries to get those kids out of there. Already many Afghan officials themselves are quitting. You mentioned the Indian consulate, but the U.S. Embassy has also asked all its non-essential staff to evacuate. So has the British, so have many others. Nobody wants to be there because it's turning out to be a lawless country. And quite frankly, I don't know if there's a long-term solution to it, because over centuries, people have tried to, there have been empires that have tried to come into Afghanistan, take over. There have been soldiers that have come in from various countries throughout history. But that particular area, that particular region has been impenetrable for the most part. And it has its own type of tribal, feudal, rule. And I guess you'd have to leave it to there until it comes to a human rights situation. Michelle Bachelet of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, just today issued a statement saying how horrified she was about what's happening to the children over there and to so many innocent people in Afghanistan, and is calling on the world to wake up and help.
Yeah. So let me ask you one last question. I said that was the last question. we saw the presence of U.S. troops in Afghanistan for over, what, 20 years, if I'm right. Do you think countries such as India, such as Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, and other places that are around Afghanistan, do they need to send their troops now to the area to sort of stop Taliban from taking over? Like, how should they be handling this? Because this is going to impact them directly.
Yeah, I don't think any country in the region is going to want to send in their troops. Nobody wants to get into a war in a foreign country unless it affects the country directly. So I don't see any reason for India to have to go in there. India would, probably like to do business with Afghanistan if the conditions are right. And so would, in my opinion, Pakistan. Now, of course, there can be radical elements from Pakistan, for instance, that might want to team up with the radical elements in Afghanistan. But that's a whole different scenario. But for a country to just come in with troops, we've seen the Soviet troops, the then Soviet Union, their troops failed. They had to leave Afghanistan humiliated. The United States is withdrawing now, and the country's already going back to archaic rule. So really, I don't think any nation, it doesn't behoove any nation to want to go in there. However, if Afghanistan, and Afghanistan certainly is a landlocked nation, it will therefore be dependent on the world for its supplies, for its food, for modernizing and things like that. I think the economic pressure will mount from around the world, including the neighborhood. And if you want to do business, you better, have a free nation, a free government, and not have strict enforcement of these laws. And Sharia law, for instance, you got to get rid of that. I mean, otherwise you're not going to have business with the rest of the world. It's as simple as that. It's like today's Iran is also being isolated for the very same reason. When you have all these strict authoritarians out there, the rest of the world no longer wants to deal with you. After all, it's a world full of commerce, of business opportunity, of hope for people, and that's what you want your country to be. And in order to be a part of the world, you'll have to deal with the world. So I think eventually the Taliban may have to just go, and there'd have to be another regime that comes in. But outside interference or outside assistance is not going to work.